Okay, so yeah, next part is going to be quite dense and theoretical. And we're going to go into Heidegger now because I think Heidegger, a lot of his work has to do with like how did we forget, and how did we forget that we forgot, or forgot that we forget, or so this is what Heidegger calls like Seinsvergessenheit, the forgetting of being, the great forgetting, and sometimes translated into also. And I guess like Heidegger speaks about the forgetting of being, but we could also just translate this as like how did we forget the mundus imaginalis, because that's the realm that mediates, at least in my perspective, our relationship to being. And like if we should take it even further in our sort of metaphorical journey here, like we could also say, how did we forget Sophia? How did we forget about the divine feminine? How did we, how did we lose the sense of her mystery? So that's just before we get into all the Heidegger language, we can keep this translation in mind, and we can make it more relevant to our course, our expedition. Keep saying course, not a course. So Heidegger has a wonderful text, I think wonderful at least, called "The Age of the World Picture," and it's just to kind of ask the question like, how did we end up with this civilization of the image, as Caban described, and what does it do with our thinking and our being that we're sort of living in the civilization of the image? And I was thinking about like when you go to a concert or something, or I was in Rome, and go into a church and everyone is there with the camera, taking all the photos instead of being at the concert or being at the church. We're in front of the fucking screen taking pictures of a picture. Yeah, that's but it speaks about as a self relationship or world relationship also, where the sort of relationship to ourselves and the world is become ossified in an image. We're gonna look at this very briefly, because this is sort of there's so much in these Heidegger texts that it's impossible to convey in any deep way in a short time. So the very fundamental idea here with Heidegger is like that the world picture does not change from an earlier medieval one into a modern one, but rather that the world becomes picture at all is what distinguishes the essence of the modern age. So when we speak about what we are looking for is a new worldview, a new image of the world, where we are coming from is actually already a stance where the world has become image, that the world did not become image, a picture, before the modern age. So I sometimes I catch myself thinking, what we really need is a new worldview, a new world picture. And I've said this also in presentations in regard to Jung and the Red Book. What Jung is really discovering is a new world image, a new world view. But just in that word itself, it's already a sort of a separation, that we can speak about the world as an image or a picture or a view of the world. It already implies a separation. So Heidegger says, like, for the Middle Ages, there was a complete different way of being in the world, as he puts it. So for the Middle Age, the being was the ens creatum, that which is created by the personal creator God as the highest cause. And here, to be in being means to belong within a specific rank of the order of what has been created. a rank appointed from the beginning, and as thus correspond with the course of creation. It's a bit technical, but the idea here is that the world has not become image here. You belong in the world in a different way. So even further from this medieval way of being in the world is the Greek way of being in the world, and that's what's Heidegger is really fascinated about, going back to the Greeks, reading the Greek text, and really trying to disclose how did they disclose, how did they dwell, how did they disclose being. I think that's the correct translation. What was their way of being in the world? What was their relationship to being? So he says that which is that which arises and opens itself, which, as what presences, comes upon man as the one who presences. He come upon the one who himself opens himself to what presences, and that he apprehends it. This is very technical again, but the idea here is that being is something that arises and opens itself, and when we're very present, we can be present with this opening of being. So it is like being is something which discloses itself to us, and we can be the one sort of listening and apprehending and attuning to it. So there's a completely different relationship to the world, to ourselves, and to being with the Greeks. And I think it's so important to kind of like to be aware of, like, because sometimes when we think, okay, we go back to Greek philosophy, for example, and then we study Greek philosophy and we say, oh, this is very interesting, all these ideas that Plato had, and but we don't actually understand that the way that they were in the world was a completely different way of revealing and opening to being. So we read Greek philosophy with the eyes of modernity, and we say all the interesting ideas and concepts. But no, it was very much about a different way of being in the world. And repeating myself, but it's so important. So he says that which is does not come into being at all to the fact that man first looks upon it in the sense of representing, that has the character of subjective perception. Rather, man is the one who is looked upon by that which is. So again, he's sort of twisting and turning it. He's saying it's not that we are looking at, the world, perhaps, in this Greek way of being and of disclosing. Being is the one who looks at us. We're the one that's being looked at by something other, something mysterious that is speaking to us, that is calling upon us, that is constantly communicating with us. And if we can open ourselves to that communication, then we are in a relationship with being. So and it's also, it's really important to note here that it's not, that we are caught in this subjective perception. This relationship to being is not necessarily subjective. It's recognized that that we are in relationship with something outside of ourselves, and a part of us is always already outside of ourselves. This is what Heidegger calls like ecstasis, ecstasy. Actually, it comes from the ecstasis, to be outside, and we have the same with existence, that to exist is to be out of ourselves in a way. So Heidegger said we're always already out there. We cannot just be in here, because when we step into a room, and we're always we're always open to what is outside of us. There's no fixed division, and there's no hard line. And I guess we can tap into this, or we can sense into this when we step into the room and we're very affected by a church, for example. We get a sense of, wow, okay, the ability to be affected by a space, or we get into a very dense and very heavy and very, wow, this feels really dense to be in here. Then we are, that's also an example of how we're always outside of ourselves anyway. When we're in a shopping mall or in the airport, we're not just unaffected by where we are. That's very much a part of it. And then the word, also a key word here, is the Greek did not have a sort of representational relationship to the world. The world is not something that needs to be represented. So representational thought is something modern. Just to give you a bit of a more sense of this Greek way of disclosing. So to be beheld by what is, to be included and maintained within its openness, and in that way to be borne along by it, to be driven about by its opposition and marked by its discord. That is the essence of man in the great age of the Greeks. Therefore, in order to fulfill his essence, Greek man must gather and save, catch up and preserve what opens itself in its openness. And he must remain exposed to all its sundering confusion. So there's a quite poetical description there of this Greek way of being and of disclosing of the relationship to being. It's something within which we are maintained and included. It's something, and it's something that we must, also have this preserving, saving relationship to. It's something that we must care for, actually. This is sort of like the essence of man, according to Heidegger. So it's care. So when we're in touch with being, there's a sense of like you wanting to care for being. Heidegger also says that man is not the master of beings, but he's the shepherd of being. So to be a shepherd of being is also a good image. So it's calling out for our care and our attention, and it's something that we are dependent on, and we are sort of held within. But it's also something that needs us in a way, and that corresponds very much to what Jung's idea of the self. It's this double aspect of of being held and being maintained, and that the self wants something with that, and that we're saved by being in contact with it. And at the same time, it needs us for its saving as well. And that's something that we'll come back to. But that's the idea of the relationship with being, or with the self, capitalist, for Jung. But also here, and this also goes, the same goes for Jung's concept of the self. The self, or being, is also marked by a discord. That there's a sort of there's an oppositional. Jung is also very much about holding the tension of opposites. So the source of being, the ground of being, is not just unity. It is a sort of there's a conflictual stuff there, oppositional, and there's a discord. And we must be able to hold this opposition. We must be able to be in that tension and to hold that tension. Yeah, it's very much the same idea here in the Heidegger as with Jung, holding the tension of opposites. And it's not just opposites within our subjective psyche, it's opposites within being. So when we look away from this Greek way of disclosing, then how do we disclose today what sort of characterizes the modern relationship to being? And that's this word representing. So in distinction to Greek apprehending, modern representation, whose meaning the word representatio first brings to its earliest expression, intends something quite different. Here to represent, in the German word is Vorstellung, means to bring what is present at hand before oneself as something standing over against. So there is a sort of placing in front of ourselves something, to relate to it to oneself, to one who is representing it, and to force it back into this relationship to oneself as the normative realm. Whenever this happens, man gets into the picture in precedence over whatever is. So this is a good little pun, gets into the picture. But this is what happens, we sort of insert ourselves up against the world, and then the world appears to us as an object. So whenever we get into this representational mode of being and of thinking, that where there is a sort of a split there, and also to force it back into it, there's something forceful about this way of being in the world, which has to do also with a sort of colonial approach to the world, that we want to conquer it, we want to master it. And so we force it, to behave in a certain way, to be stable as an object, so we can master it and we can grasp it and we can manipulate it. So something very important happens here in the modern picture character of the world. So in order to fully grasp the modern essence of representativeness, we must track out and expose the original naming power of the worn out word and concept to represent. This is the Vorstellung, to set out before oneself and to set forth in relationship to oneself. That the world becomes picture is one and the same event with the event of man's becoming subject. This seems so strange to us, because we think, that we've always been a subject. That's just, how we are. That's this sort of man's nature. But when we look at it historically, the sort of the idea of the subject is actually quite new. We had a radical different way of being in the world and being with ourselves and each other. In the Middle Ages, for example, just to give you a small example, you would at a regular household, you wouldn't have 7 different bowls for eating. You would have one big bowl in the middle, and then everyone would chuck in, and you wouldn't sleep in, each, one would have one bed for oneself. You would sleep in a big bed, all together. That would be the standard in the Middle Ages, just to give you an idea of like, okay, but we think, of course I need my own bowl, I need my own bed, but no. And that similarly with our experience of ourselves, we don't see ourselves as part of a whole. We see ourselves much more as separate individuals. And this happens, intact with the world becoming more and more an object. We become more and more locked in a subjective, separate way of being. So this interweaving of the two events, the world becoming object and man becoming a subject. So Heidegger says, the more extensively and the more effectually the world stands at man's disposal as conquered. There you have the colonial attitude again. And the more objectively the object appears, or the more subjectively, the more importunately does the subjectum rise up, and all the more I can't really pronounce that, impetuously to observation and of and teaching about the world change into a doctrine of man, into anthropology. So this is the great danger and the great problem, according to Heidegger today, that the world, changes into a doctrine of man, the anthropology. And there we have also the Anthropocene, the age of the Anthropocene, And I know this concept is in a different context in regard to climate change and so on. We entered the age of the Anthropocene, where man's effect on the planet is so clear and so pervasive now that we're into this geological age called the Anthropocene. But it also implies to our relationship to the world and to being as well. It becomes Anthropocene. The man is in the center, and the world, appears as a resource to be exploited and to this happens in many more obvious, more sort of coarse ways, but it also happens in more subtle and more nuanced ways. And I think psychology, my critique of psychology, has a big part in this, because, or to put it differently, psychology is actually made possible on the background of this change in attitude. It's made possible, psychology, that we even have a psychology today, that is possible on the background of the split between the subject and the object. So there weren't any psychologies, back in the day. There was philosophy, and there was mathematics, and there was theology, and there was whatever. But psychology is a very new discipline. It's basically from the beginning of the 19th century. And I think that's telling. We'll also get to explore this critique of psychology a bit further, and it can seem a bit silly, because all this stuff about Jung, and isn't that also psychology? Yes, but it's a different psychology, I would say, and it's not just psychology either. It's also philosophy, I would insist, and also ontology. And I think that's so important in order for us not to become stuck in this subjectivist perspective. Everything that happens is something inner, something about me, and the world out there. It's the relationship it's very split and very separate, I feel. That's a topic for another discussion. But that's just the background of this. Important to understand.